IAP US coordinator and moderator of this program. And for those who are here for the first time, the IAAP, the International Association of Academicians for Peace, is a global interdisciplinary academic project of the Universal Peace Federation, which calls on the spiritual and moral and intellectual power of academicians to contribute toward lasting global peace beyond borders, based on the admirable goals of interdependence, mutual prosperity, and universal values. The UPF co-founder, Dr. Haq Jahan Moon, also known as a Mother of Peace, calls us to work together for peace. And her organization, the UPF, our mother organization, is one of the only 140 NGOs in the world in general consultative status with the UN Economic and Social Council. So I want to thank you for joining us in this discussion topic, Korea's shrinking population. How far is the tipping point? And just before we get into the panelists, I just want to put my 5 cents in here. And because this is the shrinking population, maybe a little bit confusing. This morning, I looked at the Worldometer. It's an online site where you can find the population, current population. And this morning there was at 7.936 billion people, and it's ticking up and up and up. So we usually think that whatever is going on will go on forever, but there is some statistics, some data that's saying that the world population will not forever increase. We won't have 40 billion people in just a few years. The UN population division forecasts the world population to actually plateau at about 10.9 billion by the end of this century. And a study in the academic journal, The Lancet, places peak population around 9.7 billion by 2064, just a few years down the road, before they say it'll be a global decline of population. So we wonder, is this really true? And they forecast 2/3 of the new babies be born, and the growth will come from the African continent. In many other areas, right now, there are not enough babies. The fertility rates in industrial countries, and more important for this seminar, East Asia and the Pacific are currently in decline. For example, the large Chinese population may shrink by half towards the end of the century, and the US fertility rate has been hovering below the replacement level of 2.1 since the 1970s. And was it not for the immigrants to the US, our population would shrink. So for this program, a special note is South Korea, where fertility rate is very, very low, among the lowest in the world, if not the lowest. And in the Seoul proper, it's close to 0.8. And what that translates to us is that there are very few babies. And a point here is that how long can this go on before Koreans as a people just disappear? And I don't want to leave you in fear, because we have eminent panelists with us today who may be able to shed a little bit more light on this issue. But before we go there, I just have a request for you, or actually two. One, turn off the ringer of your cell phones. Second, all the questions you have, please write them in the chat, and we'll try to get them to all of them before the end of the main presentations. And if everything works out well, we have about an hour or so to learn it all, or just be an inspiration to learn more later. First up, to help us in this endeavor, we have Dr. Nicholas Eberstadt. He's a Harry Wendt chair in political economy at the American Enterprise Institute, AEI, and a senior advisor to the National Bureau of Asian Research. He researches and writes extensively on demographics, that means population studies, and economic development generally, and more specifically on the international security on the Korean Peninsula and Asia. And here in the US, domestically, he focuses on poverty and social well-being. He's written extensively, many books and monographs. Some titles are Poverty in China, The Tyranny of Numbers, Measurement and Misrule, The End of North Korea, The Poverty of the Poverty Rate, Measurement and Mismeasure of Material Deprivation in Modern America, Russia's Peacetime Demographic Crisis, Dimensions, Causes, Implications, and Men Without Work, America's Invisible Crisis. Dr. Eberstadt has been invited numerous times to testify before the US Congress and has served as a consultant or advisor for a wide variety of units within the US government. And he has received many awards. 2012, he received the prestigious Bradley Prize, and he delivered in 2020 the Irving Kristol Lecture. He has an academic background. He's got a Bachelor of Arts from Harvard, a Master's of Science from London School of Economics, another Master of Public Administration from the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University, and then a PhD in Political Economy and Government from Harvard University. And without tiring you out with all the other things he has done and achieved, I'll give the floor to you, Dr. Eberstadt. Take it away. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Berg. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. In my brief remarks, I think I can make a couple of introductory points for our discussion. First point is that long-range population forecasts are notoriously inaccurate. And the reason for this is because there is no reliable means to predict fertility over the long course. Social scientists have never come up with a way to do this. As long as there's such a thing as human volition, I'm not sure that they ever will be able to. That being said, it indicates that once we start guessing about how many babies the currently unborn are going to have, let's say 30 years from now, we're getting further and further and further into science fiction. But we've got a pretty good take on what's going to be happening over the next couple of decades. And we know for the world as a whole that the human population is really bifurcated into two different groups in terms of fertility. One is sub-Saharan Africa, as Dr. Berg indicated, where fertility levels are about 100% above what would be required to maintain long-term population stability without immigration. The second group of humans is everybody else. If you take all of the rest of the world without sub-Saharan Africa, if you take Bangladesh and Haiti and Hungary and South Korea and everybody else, the rest of humanity is already markedly below replacement, below the level that would be needed for long-term population stability. And we know what happens with prolonged sub-replacement fertility. First, the workforce starts to peak and decline as far as a demographer's eye can see. Then a little later on, the total population starts to do that. And counterintuitively, perhaps, small families, low birth rates, low fertility makes for population aging by tipping the population pyramid upside down. This is happening already acutely in the Republic of Korea, as Dr. Berg mentioned, with a reported snapshot rate of 0.8 births per woman per lifetime, snapped for last year, almost unimaginably low fertility level of about 0.6 snapshot last year for the metropolitan area of Seoul. And you don't have to be a demographer to know where these sorts of rates lead if they're continued over time. The population projections by the Korean government, which has very good demographers, I think detail some of the prospects for the next number of decades. If we want to take a look at those, population's already declining. Working age population, as defined, is already declining, and the process of population aging is proceeding with alacrity. So, two more points. Why is this happening? Well, the perhaps not entirely satisfactory answer, somewhat circular answer, is because the demand for children is extraordinarily low in the Republic of Korea today. The best single predictor of birth levels all around the world for all ethnic groups, all nationalities, as far as we can tell, all surveyed periods where we have this information, is the number of children that women say they want to have. It's a tremendously tight correlation across time and across space. The collapse of birth rates in South Korea, more than any other single factor, has been due to this tremendous shift in demand, if you want to call it a shift in mentality. If we look at it a little bit more closely, we can see that there's a difference between the drop below fertility, below replacement rates in Europe and North America and in East Asia. In Europe and North America, the drop is noticeable, but not as radical as in East Asia. And the arithmetic difference is largely explained by the number of births outside of marriage. Out of wedlock births, illegitimacy, those are standard features of childbearing and of family profiles in the European and North American West nowadays. Out of wedlock birth childbearing is still highly, highly stigmatized in Japan, South Korea, mainland China, Taiwan, Singapore, and the expanse, the mainland perimeter. So how the demand for children or the mentality will change I think is a big question for people who are in favor of higher birth rates in South Korea. One last point to make. When I got into this population business back in the 1970s, all of the discussion was about the population explosion. And there was a lot of catastrophist argumentation going on. Those dire predictions of doom were wrong. The world is richer, healthier, better educated, more technologically proficient, better fed today than it was at the time of the population explosion scare. I think that some of the catastrophizing over population decline is also overblown, and that healthy, wealthy, open societies where populations are declining and where numbers are shrinking have many options to deal with this slow and gradual pressure if they are willing to. Education, immigration, technological advance, reform of the welfare state. all of these are avenues through which a shrinking society, a healthy but shrinking society, can maintain and perhaps improve its prosperity. So I'd like to end with a little note of cautious optimism. I don't know where Korea's fertility trends will lead in the future, but with what we see now, the Republic of Korea, I think, still has many options for protecting itself against vulnerabilities and seizing still ungrasped opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Eberstadt. I have to say that, that's very nice to summary of the state of population understanding today, and also putting in the point that we don't really know. We don't really know what's going to happen. And I think that's one of these issues we have to agree to that. And anyway, you emphasize the difference between Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, and the industrialized nations, and also the mentality between Europe and the US, and out of wedlock births, which are not so common in Asia and Confucian societies. And that's very important. Just before we go to the next presenter, let me check with our technical support here. Dr. Yeonjin Lee, is she ready? EJ?
Yep.
Wonderful. We have our next presenter is going to be a person who took the opportunity to make a video, and her video is going to roll. It came in for us a little technically challenged people on Kakao Talk, and it was just like interesting to get it lined up. But anyway, Dr. Lee got her doctorate in public administration at Yonsei University, and became a research fellow at the Korean Institute of Childcare and Education before her current professorship at Sungwon University in Seoul, Korea. And the Korean Institute of Childcare and Education, KICCE, is a national research institute that conducts a wide range of research on early child education and care policies to contribute to the development of young children and the future population of Korea. So with great anticipation, we look forward to hear what she has to say on this video. Thank you very much. EJ, let it roll.
Hello, my name is Yoonjin Lee, and I am teaching students at Sungwon University in Korea. Let me introduce myself first, briefly. I have a PhD in social policy, and I am continuing my research in child care and child education. Of course, it is also related to low fertility research. The topic I will present today is to briefly review about Korea's low fertility policy and its future direction. I am attaching my email address, so if you have any question or need to communicate with me after this presentation, please send me an email. leeyunjin81@gmail.com. Let's start the presentation. Next page. Korea is the only OECD member country with a total fertility rate of less than 1. The reason why the low fertility rate is so frustrating is that Korea has made a lot of financial support and effort to alternative the low fertility phenomenon. Nevertheless, the total fertility rate recorded 0.81, a further drop from 2020, and has been on a downward trend since the TFR fell below 1 in 2018. It can be said to be very disappointing. If so, how do we explain the decline in the fertility rate? It can be said that it is a very difficult phenomenon for us as well. Korea is running both macro and micro policy to raise the fertility rate. For analysis, it randomly divided them. Although not all countries classify this as a low birth rate policy, Korea's policy related to the low birth rate can be divided into care policies, time policies, and cash support policies. Three aspects. First of all, it is a policy related to childcare. Korea is a representative country that provides free childcare and education. Next page. In Korea, children can go to daycare from the moment they are born, and the state provides childcare fees for anyone who wants to attend daycare center, regardless of their income level. Korea is still a country where early childhood care and education are separated. When you go to the kindergarten, the parents pay a certain amount. Meanwhile, from this year, the infant allowance was introduced. It is to pay 31 in Korea cash, in cash per month to a baby born for 1 year. In the past, when raising children at home without sending them to daycare, cash called family childcare allowance was paid. In addition, upon entering elementary school, childcare is provided both with and outside of school. In school care, fills the gaps after class time through elementary care classes and after school classes. And outside school care is provided in a certain space close to the school, their school. Although it is still linking a lot. It can be said that such an infrastructure is a very advanced and well-established system in any country in the world. Meanwhile, child allowance is paid up to the age of 8 to support child raising. And the job center operates a vocational training program for women who have lost their careers to re-employ. Although the causes of the low fertility are very various. We have been implementing these policies for several years because we believe that certain an environment conducive to raising children is a priority. The low fertility policy has been implemented in earnest since 2004 year, but it is frustrating that the effectiveness of these policies has not yet been actively shown. Then, why does the low fertility phenomenon continue despite such a lot of institutional support in Korea? And how do we change the public policy or nothing or that? First of all, it can be said that the fact that it is difficult to find a job creates an environment where marriage is late and it is difficult to have children. Establishing a social position means doing economic activities after getting a job. And it is common to have children based on such a stable life. However, as it is difficult for young people to find employment, so it is very difficult for young people to think about their marriage plan. As of 2021, the age of first marriage in Korea is um, 13 years for old for men and 13.8 years old for women. As the marriage age is delayed and the average age of childbirth is also being delayed too. 1 in 3 months is three mothers countries to be 35 years old, and late births have become a common occurrence. It is true that giving birth to two or more children has become a difficult situation in Korea. Also, parenting is becoming more difficult. Although men and women should raise their children together, it is said that women are reluctant to give birth because children is still a burden on women. Other countries are also making great efforts to increase male parenting participation, and Korea is the same. After actively supporting men to revitalize their participation in childcare, the rate of male parental leave in Korea is gradually increasing. However, even if the percentage of men on parental leave has increased, the percentage varies depending on the type of company they work for and the type of work they are engaged in. It will be more necessary in the future to create an environment in which men can actively participate in childcare or something like that, no matter what they do. Meanwhile, as a result of recent survey on the values of the MZ generation, more than 50% of them think that marriage is not necessary for them. Marriage doesn't mean much in their life. It can be said that there is a very, very strong negative perception that marriage will deprive you of the freedom you can enjoy while you're living alone. That you will not be able to do your job freely, and that you will have to focus on your child caring. This is a graph about that. So, how do we overcome this low fertility situation? First of all, you need to create an environment where you want to get married. Even if I get married, my life can be maintained and I will have to focus on publicating in advantages of marriage and the importance of family. Next, the awareness that childcare is a responsibility of all parents, not just women alone, should be established and the system should be further improved. It also has to do with the labor market environment. Working hours are gradually decreasing in Korea as well. Along with this reduction in working hours, various working environments such as flexibility or adjusting working hours and adjusting working places should be guaranteed. Of course, childcare facilities should be expanded too. And most importantly, it is a journey to find a work-life balance at the same time as marriage. The smallest country community in our society is the family, and the happiness of my life can be maintained from the happiness of this family. A nation exists when its role with the family is expanded socially, and when this mind is in place, a nation develops. Creating such a social atmosphere is very important too. My life is very important, and my family is important too. And this is the basis of social development. When a atmosphere, social atmosphere is formed so that childcare, work, and leisure can be properly balanced. When an institutional foundation is laid, the low fertility situation will be gradually overcome. Korea is also a traditional conservative country where the importance of the family is strongly established. But the perception of the young generation these days is very difficult from before. This low fertility situation can only be improved if changes are made, such as raising children together by men and women and narrowing the perception gap between generations. I believe that life is together and life in which generations are united will lead the future of the country in a positive way. As mentioned above, we have briefly reviewed Korea's low fertility situation, policies, and ways to improve it in the future. I hope there will be the more opportunities to talk about the fertility or something like that and communicate it in future. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lee. I'm sorry you cannot be with us here, so we could congratulate you and ask you some questions in person. However, we do have another champion, Ms. Lee, also from Korea, Sunjin Lee. She's a doctoral student from Korea, South Korea, at the Sunhak UP Graduate University, working on her doctorate. And she may be able to answer something, so to say, from the ground. Somebody who was there in Korea. It's currently 3 a.m. or after 3 in the morning. So she's a really dedicated person, and we are very honored and happy to have you here. She has a background got a master's in theology from Harvard Divinity School in 1996. And she has a lot of experience dealing with young people because after her graduation, she worked as a high school teacher and college counselor. So she must have spoken to many young people about their dreams and hope. And she told me she doesn't really feel she has academic credentials to speak as a researcher, but it might be even better just to hear the real story, the story behind the data. And I'm sure she can provide that for us. So I am so honored and happy to have you on screen. So please, Ms. Lee, please take it away. Thank you.
Okay, so I didn't know that I was actually supposed to speak for so if you have any questions, then I can answer. I don't have all the answers, of course, but I can probably share some of the my experience with people. And so if I just speak about my students, I've been a high school teacher for now 15 years or so now, and so I've been working with yeah, pretty much the young people who are actually I mean, thinking about marriage, thinking about having children. Not right now, but you know, so I mean, my first students are in their 30s now, right? And so and they I think it's you know, some people got married and some people have children already, and the but bottom line is that just like the fertility, you know, all the rates, you know, so it kind of shows all the data shows everything. But my experience with people here is they do not really want to have big family, and they don't necessarily want to get married, especially for young women, and because sometimes they think that sexual marriage can be a hindrance to their building their career. So that's been a sort of a norm, and so if I ask any of my high school students, it's actually it's not creating family is not in their first agenda, and yeah, there's a I mean, believe it or not, with all this data, that tsunami did not hit us yet, right? So we don't actually feel that, wow, it's a big problem, you know. So we know it's an issue, right? It's going to be an issue, but it didn't really hit us like, wow, you know. So we don't have people. But I think that maybe in 10 years from now, they say that the entire city of Busan, you know, it's another metropolitan city in Korea, in the southern area, southern part, will be gone. So about 3 million will be gone if we actually go this rate. And then I guess 2030, then probably it'll really hit us really hard. But at this point, all we hear is that, you know, the elementary school students, the number of students in the elementary school is reducing really big time. And so my high school is a private high school. So students have to come and really sort of they have to want to come, and so it's actually every year more and more, you know, the people are worried about getting the enough people who want to come, and that's been maybe 3 or 4 years. It's been a real struggle. So before it was like, you know, you could just pick and choose anyone, but we can kind of feel that yes, actually, the number of students who want to, you know, who has to go to schools is actually reducing in numbers. But the but I don't think, you know, in our day-to-day life, it didn't really hit us really that hard yet. So people are talking about the problems, and then we don't actually feel, you know, unless you are in the education sort of system, or unless you are a kindergarten teacher or an elementary school teacher, you don't really actually feel that decline of population is actually your day-to-day you know, reality. So but I know it's coming. And also some of the provincial schools, like you know, like not metropolitan areas, but Gyeonggi province, and not Gyeonggi province, but Gyeongbuk or Jeonbuk provinces, you know, kind of like more like countryside, I guess, outside of Seoul. We do have many universities. They are struggling to get enough students to fill up their student body. And so if you have lower sort of name school, name branding is very important in Korea, right? So if you, then it's actually, you have to plan on maybe sometimes maybe 4 or 5 years from now, you may have to plan on maybe closing it down. So, and so that's, I think that's going to be real. And what's another? Yeah, I was gonna say something, I actually forgot. Yeah. And yeah. And oh yeah, so I was actually going to mention about the how Korea has become big city state. I don't know if that's actually right definition. So everybody goes to Seoul. So believe it or not, Seoul is really crowded still. You know, I think someone mentioned that you don't really find children in Seoul. Many children are actually in the hagwon, so they don't actually play the playground anymore. So you don't really see them on the street, but they are there, right? So Seoul is actually very crowded. And so if you are young and if you have any kind of aspiration, you go to Seoul, right? And so that's been very intensified, much more so than when I was younger. And so when you are so I think I heard from somewhere, like if you're in a crowded situation, then and you have to compete a lot, right? So competition is a thing in Korea. And competition for the jobs, competition for the better schools. And so if you have, and also you have to be in a crowded area like Seoul. Seoul did not really expand much in terms of in the physical sense, right? And then people tend to not to think about expanding, like of creating a family. So young people in their 20s, young people in their 30s, they don't want to get married because most of them, they are living in Seoul or any kind of metropolitan area. And then they cannot really have they cannot really have the idea of having family. Either they are too poor, they're too young, they're too whatever. So 90% of 20s, as I heard, there's a statistics in Korea, 90% of people in their 20s in Korea, they are not married, right? So it was actually different when I was in my 20s. And so like only 10% people want to get married. I mean, they are married in their 20s, right? Then you have to get married in their 20s to have children. But they usually wait until in their 30s, sometimes in 40s, right? So by the time they actually want to have children, they cannot have children. Then you have fertility issues, right? And so yeah, so I mean, I can see why people do not want to have children. And it also became very, very evident starting from 2015. I don't know what happened in 2015 exactly, but starting from that, our ratio for having like newborn babies went really down 2015. So maybe one incident that I can think of at the time is 2014, the Seoul Ferry incident. A lot of high school kids, they actually died, 200 or so, something. Then maybe that had an impact on the psyche of the young couples. I don't know. So something happened in 2015, and then actually really people really started having that children. So all right, I stopped talking.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lee. Thank you for giving us the home turf view here and talking about schools and that maybe the impact of the low birth rate is not so apparent if you are hustling and bustling in the big city and it's crowded and you think this is kind of something that happens far away. If you always fighting for your own survival and moving on, and so many young people are in Seoul, so it's hard to see. So that's a good point. The subjective experience that you talk about. Very nice. You raise a question, and I'd like to ask Dr. Eberstadt to come back on the screen here. You asked a question that maybe I don't know if you can answer. If you raised, Ms. Lee, about something that happened, a change in birth rate in 2015. You said it was a big drop. Is that do you have any comment on that or anything else that our other speakers mentioned? Dr. Eberstadt?
Yes. Am I back on the screen now?
Can we pin Dr. Eberstadt on the screen? Thank you.
Am I there?
Yeah, you're
okay.
here.
Oh, there I am. Okay, great. Well, there's been, I mean, as you all know, and as Ms. Lee and Professor Lee know much better than I, there's been a revolution in childbearing in South Korea, as in East Asia, over the last 2 generations. And in the early 1960s, there were government policies in South Korea trying to encourage or sometimes pressure women to have fewer children. And now it's turned all the way around, because it's been below, the level has been of childbearing has been below replacement level for a generation, and getting lower and lower still, apparently. I mean, part of the I think Ms. Lee gave us a really vivid view of the insight into the mentality which is involved in this. She described, I think, really very poignantly what we might call the flight from marriage. And that's something which is seen not just in South Korea, it's seen in all of East Asia. It's been seen in the West as well. As I mentioned earlier, there are many people in the West who have postponed or avoided marriage without postponing or avoiding children. But on the whole, even in the West, with out of wedlock childbearing notwithstanding, the levels are still not ones which can sustain long-term population stability. You know, in how to put this, South Korea has more money now than it's ever had before. It's got more education than it's ever had before. Whether or not it seems this way, it has more housing space and more appurtenances in housing for people than ever before. People have more free time than they've ever had before. They have more vacations than they've ever had before. There's just one thing that they don't have more of, and that's children. And so when you have more of everything, but then just one thing you've got less of, that suggests to me it's a question of priorities rather than a question of absolute exigence. Of course, there's the equivalent of the arms race in education in South Korea, with all of the expensive expenditures on after-school studies and the tutors and so forth. Of course, the real estate problem, especially in Seoul, is acute for people. Trying to think about purchasing real estate in Seoul seems like a dream for so many young people, and even for people who aren't so young. But the question of where we put family and childbearing in our overall priorities, I think, is quite pertinent here. Mr. Hess shared, I think, a very informative video on our chat function, making, a PowerPoint on the chat function, observing that within the OECD, ROK may be one of the few countries that doesn't rank family as #1 in public opinion polls, rank it as #3. That's probably not unrelated to what we are seeing here. It seems very surprising to me as an outsider for a society that I think of as coming from, Confucian tradition, given what I've read of, the Analects and so forth. But I'm an outsider, and I don't understand the same way that people who are insiders do.
Thank you, Dr. Eberstadt. Ms. Lee, do you have any comments on that or works?
Well, so the family, the emphasis on the family has been really important for the longest time in Korea. And then recently, they are not anymore. And so the Confucianism itself is kind of losing its kind of attraction or merit, right? And we don't necessarily learn about Confucianist teachings. So it should be sort of embedded in our own culture. We have ancestral worships and, we have celebration, things like that. But young people do not really learn about that anymore. We don't really teach them. And then we are so busy teaching about Western things, they spend so much time, wasting wasting a lot of money on learning English. I mean, learning a second language is good, right? But it's too much of it, right? And sometimes it's like too expensive. And also another thing about why people don't want to have children is too expensive to have a baby. Um, and not, I mean, not baby, but it's just, education, right? And then because especially in their 20s and 30s, they grew up in this very competitive society, and so they know what kind of sacrifice their parents had to make for them to be where they are, right? So really highly educated, young people, they don't want to go through that, and also they don't want their children to go through that. Like, so when I actually asked the high school kids, okay, so do you want to have family or children? It's actually I mean, sadly enough, they one of the major things they say, maybe because actually my kids actually very high, they're in a very highly competitive environment. What they said was, you don't want to have children because I don't want my children to go through what I went through, right? Um, as growing up in a society, and then you have to compete, for whatever. You have these high achieving parents, and they also very high achieving themselves, but it's a kind of a stress, growing up. So you don't really have a childhood, in a sense that you look back and you just remember beautiful things. Kids don't have that, right? So I'm talking about high school kids, and so it's like, then yeah. So to them, it's a very natural decision to say, I don't want to have children because what do you do with them? It's actually kind of very that's the reality. I mean, I can't say for sure that's everybody's reality, but I think it's some people's reality here, young, in their teens. So yeah, so Confucius ideas, and it's just, I think, in living in this kind of society of very high pressure cooker, and also they don't really go, the children do not really be children here, and so children should go outside and play, right? But you have to, in a very early age, you have to go to after school, getting whatever the training, but you don't, and a lot of kids just kind of, especially boys, they just play computer games, the whole time. Many of them are really addicted to it too. um so what they went through is not very positive. So it's kind of, for them, it's very natural to decide, I don't want to create another human being so that they have to go through what I went through, right? So I think that's actually the reality I see.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. Dr. Eberstadt or Ms. Lee, do you know about any data that would indicate how many children women want to have? Dr. Eberstadt, you mentioned that's a key indicator, how many children women want to have, their dream. And is there any survey on those kind of things?
I haven't seen recent data on that. Certainly the surveys would say more than 0.8 children on average. There'd be a gap there. I mean, analogous is, which I know a little bit more about, is the survey data for Japan, which of course has been a below replacement fertility society for, since the 70s, but starting in the 1950s, the first in the West. The data in Japan are maybe informative as a mirror, let's say. Still in Japan, we see surveys showing that the average reported desired family size is above replacement, almost 2.5 sometimes, whereas the achieved fertility is far below that, 1.4, 1.3. My own guess, and I should say it's only a guess about the Japanese situation, is that people aren't really telling what they really feel. So that there's a lot of pressure. Women feel a lot of pressure to conform to the norm of a 2 or 2.5 child notion, whereas given the realities of their life, we're seeing more of what they actually desire. I mean, Ms. Lee, you've got much more experience with this clearly than I would have, but as a uninformed outsider who visits the ROK from time to time, the younger women that I meet don't seem to be overly enamored with the idea of finding an immediate mate among the young men that they're associated with, and the idea of waiting until later seems to be quite acceptable, at least to the people that I come across. And I don't know if I just have a unusual cross section of people that I meet, or if this kind of flight from marriage, as some of the academics have called it, is pretty well established.
Yeah, I would say that your experience is actually quite, very general, very common. And especially younger people. So my generation, I'm in my 50s. I'm not. So our thing was to sometimes get married and to have children, right? In the 40s and 30s, so less and less people, and then kids, people in their 20s and 30s, much less so. And so especially for women, it's like having this woman having mother-in-law issues, right? In Korea, many times sons, are like maybe they are too attached to the mothers, and then when they get married, they still have sort of issue, and so the young women do not really want to handle that. They may have boyfriends, but they don't want to get married. As soon as you get married, you have to sort of take care of all this, the in-law issues. So that's actually another thing. It's very cultural. That's in a sense, that's very Confucianist idea of it, having this, like you have to be in charge of taking care of your in-laws, and you're not just you and your husband, but you are actually family to family, So Confucianism kind of is very much alive in that sense, but it doesn't really help for the woman to want to get actually married. So, and yeah, and actually there's a question about banning the birth control. I don't think that's going to happen in South Korea. No, all the women will be they'll come out and protest against that. And then there was actually another question about 50s. Yes. And so so job situation, or really high suicide rate. I think Korea has the highest suicide rate for teenagers. So it shows it's kids are going through a lot, and then these teenagers, they grow up to be in their 20s. I don't think they really want to jump into having a family, because their experience has not been really that positive. And so pressure cooking society really doesn't help for the couple to spend time together and then try to create a better marriage, right? Try to maintain the marriage one way or another. It doesn't help. And then kind of there's issue with extramarital affairs and things like that. And it's not very positive experience. Why do you want to have family? To have or not, to repeat that same kind of problem. So if you kind of like go through case by case, and then so when you actually look at each human experience, then outside of data, then it's very it's actually natural. Why not? Why don't you? Well, I mean, would it be very strange that these young people actually want to have more family? So yeah, it's a kind of doom and gloom kind of. but that's actually the reality I see, and also more of the so when I because high school so I see high school kids every year, so I can see the more and more of their parents getting divorced, and so divorce rate has been pretty, like increasing, right? And that also doesn't help for the young people to decide to get married. And again, on a little bit more, more negative side of family experience. So yeah.
Thank you so much. We are up, the hour is up, but we need another 5 hours to even just talk about this, let alone coming up with solutions. We have a list of questions, as you both alluded to, that talking about external factors, that's certainly a limitation, money and housing and time and pressure cooker that we heard today, pressure cooker, and bad childhood experiences. So nobody wants to give that to their own kids. They don't want to have a repeat of that. So, I want to invite on Dr. Jenkins on the platform here, but before he shares anything, if he's ready, that just a few final words here. Is there hope, or is it just the need for another seminar, or where should we go with this? Just a short.
Can I interject for a moment, just briefly? Oh, sorry, Reverend Jenkins, are you?
Who is this?
Oh, I'm Daniel Hess.
Yeah. Okay. Let's just get the panelists to say their final conclusion. We like to hear from you, but we're a little bit on a time crunch at this point.
Thanks, Dan.
But
yeah, go ahead.
I appreciate your PowerPoint, but let's get to the panelists. Would you comment, Dr. Eberstadt?
Sure. One point, 2 points. First, about abortion. Restricting or prohibiting abortion, I think, as a practical matter, would make some but not much difference in the long term with birth rates. We've seen abortion be withdrawn in places like Romania. That was a surprise. The birth rate almost doubled from one year to the next. But because Romanians don't think that babies come from under cabbages, they figured other ways to deal with this, and the birth rate dropped right back down after that. I think a similar would happen with ROK. We've talked about family, but one last point to make about that. Demographers collect information on head counts and households. They don't collect information on extended family networks. If we had that information, we would see that the extended family networks in the ROK are collapsing, that they're atrophying really fast. That would actually be the only demographic trend that I would bring to your attention as a matter of concern, because it's not clear to me what's going to substitute for the extended family. I don't think that we're going to have robots taking care of us, even very smart robots. I don't think they necessarily will do that great a job in the future. And we know from a century of social policy that the government is not a very good substitute for the family, but it is a very expensive one.
Thank you, Dr. Eberstadt. Okay, Ms. Lee, any final comment?
I guess, like the people, we should change our mindset about a lot of things, and it's actually very cultural, so it's going to take time, but if we don't, then I think Korea is in trouble. But so thinking about maybe having like foreign immigrants coming to work here, it's not going to be easy because we are very homogeneous and society. And then there will be some racial problems, but I think we need to overcome that. And I don't know. I mean, and also a lot of cultural issues that I talked to you about, and then how the competition became a norm, and then that should change. The education, education cannot just be competition against each other, right? So we need to have that changed. Otherwise, people will have to spend so much money on the I'm not talking about tuition fee, but I'm talking about all these extra things that parents have to spend on, and so that has to change. Then maybe the easiest way to change is probably that the parents don't have to spend so much money on their education, on the children's education. But that's going to be also quite hard, because it's kind of individual decision. So yeah, I don't really see how we're going to get out of this though. But I guess we need to just accept the fact that it is what it is, and then try to maintain the society as much as we could. Yeah, I think so. My idea is then 2030, so about 10 years from now, about 9 years from now, and then it will really hit us. Like, we're going to actually feel it in the skin, just like the global warming. We always talked about it, the climate change and all of that. But until recently, we actually felt that. We feel the seasons actually changing very weirdly. And then, so it kind of became more real to us. And then we are actually doing a little bit more. And then I think maybe Koreans will actually do that maybe when we actually feel in our skin. So yeah, sorry, I don't have any answer. I told you I don't have an answer.
Thank you so much for your input. And there are lots more questions in addition to your answers and comments in the chat. And I apologize for all those we couldn't get to, including you, Mr. Hess. There are so much more to say on this topic, but I'd like to offer the few last seconds here to the UPF President International and our US Chairman for UPF here, Dr. Michael Jenkins, just for a few concluding remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Berg. This has been a most important session. I would like to ask you to do another one as soon as possible. I've been to Korea many times, and also I want to thank Dr. Eberstadt and also Ms. Lee Sunjin. I see you're at Sunhawk University. We hope you get your doctorate very soon. We need you. And by video, Dr. Lee Yoon Jin. It was a wonderful presentation, but quite shocking. And the modernization, we see the impact, and there's deeper issues. I was in Korea. I've been in Korea every year for many occasions. But one thing we were shocked about, our affiliate was a university and near Asan, and I was shocked because suddenly, because of this trend and birth rate, the decline of birth rate, population decline of young people was severe. So Korean government had to close, I think it was 1/3 of all universities, because there just wasn't the student body anymore. And fortunately, the university we're affiliated with was able to remain. But this is a very serious issue for all of the modernized nations and others too. So I want to thank you. So reasonable, so important. Definitely the preferences of families all throughout the world as they modernize, become more prosperous, more free, as Dr. Eberstadt was saying, and then suddenly they don't want to have children as young parents, and they want to enjoy life more, and that leads to them not having as many children as they might have. So we see this as a crisis, and we really thank you all, the experts here, Dr. Berg. Thank you so much. We're very honored to present this forum, and we are here every Tuesday on some kind of aspect of how to support the Republic of Korea and our friendship between America and Korea. Dr. Berg, thank you very much. I'm really honored to be with you.
Thank you, Dr. Jenkins. And And thank you for all of you who logged on, either here on the Zoom or on Facebook. We look forward to get digital responses or otherwise in the chats on those forums, so we can understand really where you are at and what to address further. And as Ms. Lee said, well, we don't really have the answers, but at least maybe it comes up when we talk a little bit more. So I look forward to see you again on this topic at some time in the future, and on next Tuesday with Dr. Jenkins on another topic about Korea, because this is a very important nation. Most eyes are focused on Ukraine now, but Korea is up there. So let us think further, and I look forward to see you again. Thank you so much for everybody who helped, the staff, EJ and Larry Moffat and others. And thank you so much. And